All right, so I will ask a couple short questions at the beginning, and while you start to think of your questions in the audience. And Fope, I wanted to start with you. It's a really inspiring message to hear this from Autodesk. In fact, if I would reflect 10 years back when we first started the Industrialized Construction Forum, I would have never expected to hear Autodesk saying that we think the future of construction is industrialized. So I think that's very interesting for me. And I also find that it's really interesting, maybe I missed it, but I don't think I heard one mention of Revit in your presentation. So I'm curious, what's changed at Autodesk? Why, can you say, what's been the path that's taking to this point where now we have this kind of perspective?
Very good question. So we still have Revit. Revit is still, part of the solution. But as we mentioned, we're trying to empower the shift from design BIM models to include more production and manufacturing data. So as I mentioned, we have the informed design that connects the AEC platform, so Revit, with the design and manufacturing side, which is Inventor. So we have that platform, Autodesk Informed Design, but we also have the Fusion, Revit to Fusion, Fusion to Revit API as well, to also encourage that connectivity between AEC and design and manufacturing.
Yeah, great. And Duncan, let me turn to you. I really appreciate this historical view, and every time we talk, I always appreciate this view you have. But I need to ask you a question that I get asked all the time, and I don't ever have a good answer, so maybe you can help. Why is it different this time? Is it that design or what you said about kind of rethinking the design standard, is that the key, or what do you think will change this time around?
Well, I hope it is different this time. But if we're being optimistic, I think there are critical drivers. Digitalization, digital capabilities, even Lars was just mentioning. I think understanding material limitations and resource constraints. And then, really sort of the underlying understanding of decarbonization combined with population growth that was touched on first thing this morning. And I think that if we're serious about tackling those challenges, traditional construction cannot decarbonize. I think that certain digital practices are really challenging in a traditional construction setting. So those factors, although at times it can be difficult to be optimistic about what faces us into the future. When we look into the future of construction and the industrialization story, then I'm relatively speaking an optimist that we can change the industry because of those.
Yeah, thanks. Tyler, I'll turn to you now, and I'll be conscious of where I'm asking this question from, in the heart of Silicon Valley with the greatest concentration of venture capital. Why do we need the Builders Lab as a nonprofit? Can't we just rely on venture capital to fund the innovations that we need?
Because I need to pay rent is the easy answer. But no, I think time and time again, not coincidentally, alongside the large looming bankruptcies that we continue to see happen in big and small ways, tends to be alongside those who sought venture or other quasi-predatory financial capital, in the sense, predatory at least in the sense that it's short-term and dependent on really high rates of return, that surprisingly enough don't mesh super well with the housing industry or the building industry writ large. The turnaround times of most companies doing any physical building in the housing space do not align super well with the interests and the ability and the expectations of venture capital. And so there's still a space for it. Again, I think the very broad umbrella of industrialized construction definitely includes some ventures that are probably appropriate for VC money. But in the grand scheme of our storytelling currently, I think it's proven that it's not appropriate in most cases, and certainly not for those doing the most truly innovative and physical product-based progression.
Great, thanks. And Lars, my question for you. You work for a general contractor in Skanska, and you mentioned something about a lab prototype and R&D. And we heard earlier, I don't remember actually who said it in the last session, but about the low percentage of investment in research that typically general contractors invest in R&D. So this is not something I normally hear about. How were you able to set up such a kind of approach to R&D within the kind of a traditional general contractor system?
A very good question. I really don't know. When we started this, it was just an idea. Can we do this? I guess it's more than 10 years ago. And we started off, some people were interested. Robots, can they be used? And we started off that way with small funding from Skanska. But in the early stages, we saw that this may be possible, and there, more and more people got interested, and in the last phase here of the project, also Vinnova was involved, Swedish Road and Transport Administration. So more and more organizations got interested, and I guess that's the way. The answer is, people got interested.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I want to turn it over to all of you. I know we're running a little bit behind schedule, but I also know, I think I saw a little bit of rain. As a native Californian, I know nobody drives in the rain or goes outside, so I expect you'll be able to stay a little bit longer. So I'm curious to hear from the audience. You have some questions? I see a hand back here. And then also one in the very back. Let's start here. Make sure you introduce yourself as well.
Mark Bielas, I'm a developer. Without talking your own book, what do you think is going to be the most, or who is doing the most impactful work in the industry right now, if all four of you guys can answer?
Wow, big question, all right.
And specifically impactful for affordability and or efficiency.
Casual, just all the things. The first one that comes to mind, I'd probably have a different answer in 20 minutes when I chew on this more, but the first one that comes to mind, particularly in the US context, that I think is a sleeping giant of impact is the Department of Energy. So I think they've played a really significant role, even in the last few years, trying to push forward the conversation, merging the industrialized construction world, broadly defined, with more energy efficiency and general better environmental performance from buildings. And in particular, the one thing they're really trying to push forward that I think they'll eventually have headway in is the retrofit space. It got referenced a few times today, and it's easy to forget, but the massive need for retrofits just for electrification, but also for energy efficiency upgrades, for public health and safety. Turns out we live in a seismic region with still a lot of old buildings that have not been retrofitted in that regard. I think there's a desperate, frantic need for many layers of improvement in the retrofit space that industrialized construction can play a role in. And I think Department of Energy is really trying to push that narrative and the money to support that technological growth currently.
Anyone else want to give their opinion?
I thought Tyler might say building 4.0 CRC, but I'm not allowed to say that. So, but I think when we look overseas, I think what Jennifer was touching on, the work out of the UK that Brian Wood have contributed into, particularly from an open source standpoint. And that touched on Darryl's talk this morning about looking for an industry standard. I think that work by the UK government points towards the possibility of there being some sort of industry level accord that could, be akin to what we're seeing in the US in the 70s with the auto manufacturers here. And so I think I think, yeah, it's pretty high level. It's not a company necessarily. Well, I mean, Brighton Wood is a company, but it's not. But the impact, I think, really sits at that high level, and it's the kind of seeds of a possible future.
Yeah. Lars or Fope?
Not to sound too vague, but I would say there's been an increased collaboration between academia and industry. A lot of work has been done research-wise in academia around all these topics, but we see that it sort of ends in the lab, and we need the industry buy-in to be able to take some of those ideas out and be implemented in industry. Also in industry, not a lot of people have time to pause projects and focus on research. So there's a lot of avenues, for cross-collaboration. And someone coming from industry is now in, someone coming from academia that's now in industry. I've seen over the past few years just that exponential increase in cross-collaboration across both that are moving the needle towards where we want to be in industrialization of construction.
And Lars, do you want to give an opinion?
I don't know. Actually, we don't dare to change contractors. We are afraid of change. And I guess that it will always be difficult to change this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw another question back here. Santiago, is it online or is it your own question? Online question, great.
Online participant Irfan Kustovic for FOPE points out that it's exciting that Autodesk is bringing all these design processes into a single platform. Based on their experience, industry experts are reluctant to share proprietary information like connection details. And so the question is, what's your take on this, and how should we as an industry perceive this and address the intellectual property issue?
Very good question. I think, to be honest, from a personal point of view, we really can't move forward with the silos, the fragmented nature of the industry. But that's how the construction industry is. And in order to move forward or to expand the impact that we're trying to have, we somehow have to come together. The IP part of it, I can't particularly say, but we're all trying to achieve the same goal. And we're all experiencing the same problems, but we're not communicating about the challenges or the problems, or we're not open to each other about the kind of challenges that we're facing. And forums like this are good, where we can share our individual experiences, network, and hopefully collaborate and learn. But without breaking the silos, the walls, it's going to be very difficult, and God forbid, in 20 years, we're still having this kind of conversations. From a professional side, it would be good to have things. I think we're starting to see things like marketplaces for IC, or databases for kits of parts or connections and such. And those have been helpful with research and trying to develop solutions that could potentially apply to everybody.
Great, and thanks, Irfan. I know it's 2 a.m. in the Netherlands, so thanks for staying up with us. Other questions? Here we have one. Yep.
Hi, I'm Pooja Jain, and I'm with WSP. It's really interesting to see discussion about horizontal construction. You talked about bridges and concrete. Your talk kind of made me think about precast concrete, and I'm curious if what you have discovered, use of robots in a bridge, what appears to be maybe a one-off case, has that been thought about being used in precast construction, where perhaps they are predefined units with repeat rebar configuration? And I guess my second part of the question is that, have you done any cost-benefit analysis relative to using humans versus robots for the application that you studied?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up this with prefab in bridge construction, because if we look here in the US, it's used to some extent, the AASHTO beams and things like that, AASHTO girders. But bridges are, they are designed for site-specific conditions, and they are very big. It's very big structures, heavy structures, and they are normally it's necessary to build them on site. It's hard to prefabricate. If I now move to Sweden, all our bridges, I would say, are built on site. They are site specific. You don't prefab things for bridges. And the estimates that we do for these bridges that we build, it shows that even if we prefabricate things, which may have a cost reduction, that is balanced by the man hours that you have to spend in the factory and transportation. So it always ends up almost equal when we do our estimates. Prefabrication doesn't help to reduce cost in bridge construction. In some cases, very special cases, yes, but otherwise we build them on site. Steel girders, for example, is an example where you can prefabricate to some extent, but not more than that, unfortunately.
And I think we have time for one last question. Do we have a last hand? I see we have Ray, yeah?
Thank you. I want to refer back to a comment Daryl made this morning about the importance of standardizing the connections in order to create a whole ecosystem of companies. And I think to activities the government made in the computer industry when they broke up IBM and forced IBM to separate the hardware from the software and specify the connection details that led to Amdahl and Hitachi and a bunch of other people making mainframes, and eventually forced IBM to become a software company. But in any case, and services, I think of TCP/IP on the internet, I think of other standards created by government or by government intervention, and perhaps that's the way to get around the silos, because once we get these connections and means of interfacing between the various parts of prefab buildings, we can generate a whole ecosystem very quickly, I think. I'd be interested to get Daryl and others' comments on that.
Good. We'll have to wait for Daryl for the ending break, but I don't know if anyone on the panel has a thought about the role of government in standards. Duncan, I'm looking to you. Yeah, that's talking about standards.
Yeah, I mean, I think largely I'd say I agree. It goes to the point Jennifer raised from the UK committee around it. Safety critical. Construction is. Not only safety critical during occupation, but safety critical during construction, and I think safety critical when it comes to the issue of climate change, which is the largest threat to humanity that's going, and therefore, if there's not a mandate to look towards efficiency, to look towards standards when it comes not just to connections, I think, but standards around the carbon impact of new building or of renovation, then I think if we are to move quickly, then the length of time that it would take to create an industry accord perhaps is too long to wait, and therefore it probably does require some other form of intervention, and that's something that plays out even in the research space. Government takes an active role to encourage the construction industry to undertake R&D, and it's a similar dynamic.
Yeah, and I think Tyler had a comment. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll also just add that building code legalese is a little bit far out of my depth, but mostly hearing from others and amplifying it here, I think a big part of the conversation we're poking around on the research side and in the US policy context is that the prescriptive code of buildings, of like these are the finite number of ways you can connect two steel pieces ad infinitum for every imaginable building method, is supposed to be sort of setting a baseline standard that has consistency, repeatability, but we have proven out in a longitudinal case study that it has not added that inspection, but also permitting in the process, despite massive prescriptive codes across the 19,000 plus jurisdictions in the US, still hasn't really added or guaranteed consistency in the schedule or the cost on that front. And so I think what has been a key piece of the even more recent growth of IC and success of IC in Sweden, alongside many other European countries, is a shared performance code across jurisdictions. And I think it's safe to say that there are slightly less than 19,000 performance codes that we could probably boil down the US geography to, large as it is. And there are definite intersectional constitutional questions that come out between federal, state, and local government jurisdiction on that exact question. But I think nudging us more towards a performance-based code so that we don't have to define the finite number of ways that standards can be met, but allowing companies to innovate across a range of materials, assembly methods, and blurring the lines between on and off-site work through performance codes, I think is something we're trying to push forward, or at least be told why that's a terrible idea.
All right. Before I invite Martin to come up and give a closing word, I'd like to one more time thank all of our panelists for the great presentations.